now. Sorry, I'm getting off topic, but
I agree with you completely. And actually, the thing what we're trying to do is give people, like, you and I and others have you. It seems like it'd be automatic that for you that people could see that energetic presence and be able to recognize that this child, is living in that inner being, and that's what's unfolding, and we need to respect and nurture that and understand what it needs. But it's not the case. A lot of people don't really perceive that, and this whole child study process is a way, okay, what can you observe? Let's start with what you can observe that's more concrete. And I'm gonna teach you how to see the impact of the energetic being on that and unfold it through the process of imaging. So this really is a way of supporting individuals who really don't feel that energetic presence. But I agree with what you're saying 100%. That's where we really want to get to. And that's what this process is about. So let's see.
Can I also jump in? One of the things I've really appreciated about Rudolf Steiner is we usually talk about the 5 senses, but he has a 12 sense model where, and I put a link into the chat box about looking at, when we say senses, he includes the normal senses that we would have, but he also has things like concept, language, hearing, warmth, vision, balance, taste, smell. So he broadens what we mean by senses. And I think that, Tanya, what you're talking about is also the difference between our intuition and our sensing function. There is the sensing function, and then there's the intuition that somehow takes all of those and wraps them into a larger picture. And what I appreciate that you're doing, Japa, is whether we have an inclination towards the large picture, the intuition, or the sensing picture, the particulars, that doing a loving observation would include all of those, that we would integrate our thinking and our feeling in our observation of children.
And so allow people to come to an unfolding of some soul picture of a child out of maybe where, it's like we always talk about, we got to start with where children are. We got to start with where adults are too. And many adults, don't necessarily have that capacity. They will do exactly this first part. They'll say, well, here's what I observed. And then you say, oh, you know what? You can take those observations and you can get a sense of deeper things going on in the presence of the child. Especially if you start with this loving approach and assuming the child is individual and has brought something into the world, other than what the body is presenting. If you make that assumption and then you start looking at these details, you might ask yourself, how is that manifesting in the physical presence of the child, as well as the other ways we can perceive the child energetically? I took and changed to the point where the child is speaking, because speech with movement is also one of those big things that can indicate the energetic quality that your child brings. I'm gonna play that briefly.
He's stacking all the bricks up. Stacked up. It won't fall down.
Back there with the paint. Thank you.
It's not falling.
I know.
Even more.
It must be a tower, is it?
How about mine? Look at mine.
Oh, what that one?
I made that.
That was a very tall tower.
Mine is a castle.
Yours is a castle? Oh, nice castle.
I don't know if
I think when you do that, it's going to go. It's going down. It's going down.
Japa, you can't stop it there. I want to know if that thing falls or not.
Yeah, we'll get to that. So this speech quality is and being able to describe it for young children. Like in that case, particularly, you heard her speech, and now some descriptions. I'm gonna go to this next one. This is not the child in in the video, but here's how this one teacher talks about the child: loud, expressive, normal pitch, pronunciation of some letters are not clear. And this is actually for that particular child: slightly higher pitch, breathy, childlike voice. Sometimes you can get a child, you can say that I've seen people talk about a child's voice being wet and breathy and dry and are expressive, are held back. And so again, even though I am describing something in a sensorial way, it's really this energetic quality, this nuanced energetic quality that I'm trying to capture. Not really trying to necessarily get any demographic information, but I'm really, exactly like Tanya said, I'm trying to capture how this energetic quality is manifesting in the child's voice. Any responses?
Joppa, do you have, you're pulling from some sheet here. Is there a blank form here?
Yes, there is. Actually, this is a form which I create, which the teachers I work with fill this out ahead of time. Well, not ahead of time, actually. And then I go observe the child like I'm observing 2 children now. And then this form is available. And actually, it's actually linked to, let me go back to the slideshow. There it is, observation form. If you click on that, you actually will get the form.
Can you send us a link to the presentation and to that form?
Yes, I will.
Great.
Because I actually do want people to either use this form to observe a child in their life or the first child in the video in preparation for doing the image work next week. So I do want people to have the availability of this.
Can I ask you a question? So since you're in education, do you find that, I almost, this is like a wishful thinking, right? But if all teachers can see past the physical and they can see past the verbal cues and actually can see the soul of a child, right? And then be able to address that or even interpret that child's interaction with the class and then also with themselves as an expression, of their true being. That is my ideal situation but do you find that the current educational system is there, or is there a lot of teachers who are aware of this, but, are not speaking up maybe? Or are we just completely blind in this?
No, actually, now, of course, this comes out of the child study approach, which is done in all Waldorf schools.
Okay.
All Waldorf schools use this child study approach. They actually do almost exactly what I'm presenting here over the next few weeks. So it gets a little bit more esoteric in some Waldorf settings. It maybe seem pretty esoteric even to you all when we get to the imaging stuff. But in reality, I've tried to make it more concrete. But also, one thing that's even more mainstream right now is this practice of really learning to observe children. Because the thing is that teachers haven't really been in the past, at least in the early childhood programs I know, encouraged to really sit down and do careful, loving observations of the children. Even that act itself has its own benefit in terms of how you relate, how you're in relationship with the child, your capacity to recognize the child on some level better, and your capacity to be in relationship. And this is becoming a part of the early childhood expectations for teachers. Now, the problem with all of this is you do have this reduction when you start getting into more mainstream professional areas of child observation. It's what comes next that's the problem, because what happens is that in what they call so-called evidence-based approaches, you come up with these set of benchmarks or criteria to tell you what your observations mean, which actually begins to put the child in a box. to undo the work you've just done, in terms of really building your relationship with the child. And so what we need to hopefully happens in the future is that people begin to say, well, there's another source of being informed about the child other than these more reductionist benchmark criteria kind of things that we use the observations to inform. We can use imagery. We can use our intuition. We can use our feeling perception to keep the observations whole, so that we don't end up in essentially negating who the child is after we have done this careful observation. Do people follow where I'm coming from with that?
Yeah, and I really appreciate the question, Tanya. I also, again, a lot of adults haven't cultivated their capacities to sense all of the things that we're talking about. And so I think that's another, how do we help cultivate teachers or caregivers or even our own capacity to tap in, to presence all of these different things that we're inviting them to see. And I think that's a capacity of, do teachers know how to do that kind of observation? Are they aware of their own capacities, both to sense the physical and the intuitive or the spiritual? And I think that takes some development as well for teachers.
Well, mine is just turned 8, and she is in 2nd grade, right? And so I will share the story, and this is why I'm on this call, is because I went into it was called like coffee and meat or whatever it was, but they had a counselor at school that was there to address with parents who would want to attend issues or things of how you would deal with childs who were angry or acting out or things like that, right? Or how to better parent under those circumstances, right? And I went into this thing, and all the questions were normal. Everything flowed perfectly normal in it. And then the question then I raised is, what if the child is acting out because they are spiritually aware and they are intuitive, like they're an empath, and the acting out is not due to their energy, they're reading someone else's energy. And then, that to me, that happens all the time. I have to know how to control someone else's energy coming into my space before I'm able to, discern what is mine and what is someone else's. And so I asked that question. And the reason, I would love some sort of solution to this, because the response that I got was shock, right? Like, how dare someone mention empath in this, public school setting, I guess, right? And then 2, the counselor who was there, who was a certified counselor, basically said, oh, well, I'm sorry, I'm not at liberty, or I don't have the right authority to comment on that, right? Or to even weigh in on that. And so I sat there as a parent going, so there's this situation, which is the reality of most kids. Most of them are empath. Most of them have incredible abilities that we're not able to, foresee even what they're happening. And 2, the school system is not at liberty to comment on that, right? And so I found myself as a parent at a complete loss going, wait, what? There should be a solution. Like, I know her truth, and I know how it is to have someone energy to come on to you, right? But then here's the school system. Now, granted, I'm in Oldham County, so I know Waldorf might have a solution for this, but Oldham County Schools does not. And so that is my wish forward, is we have to start thinking outside the box of normal circumstance, And
even I just was recently reading about, there was a little meme that talked about how we, a lot of the work we do with children on the so-called autistic spectrum, is about trying to help those children learn how to accommodate to whatever environments they're in. And this meme talked about how we have to start teaching other children and adults, about how do I gain the capacity, to relate and feel, into where the people so-called on the autistic spectrum are coming from. That should be the ideal that we need to develop as well as nurture the development of others. And so one approach to even addressing that issue is are we asking that question? So yes, we have a child in our classroom who seems to be disruptive or seems to can't find the flow. What is the appropriate response for all of us do that? Not just what do we do to get that child under control, and that is a question that lives out there. But, again, I had a child in my class in Detroit, and I realized this child was an old soul. I mean, and a lot of the things the child was doing to me says, who are you trying to teach me? It was like, it's what I felt from the child. And I was like, okay, I bow, but this is the role we're in right now, man. So let's see how we can do the best with this. Because, she would just look at you and then be like, okay, I get it, but we still got to figure out a way to work this new role we in here now, and that's got to be a part of it,
Tanya, I really appreciate the question, and that's exactly what the Soul-Centric City is trying to cultivate. I've met with the JCPS Social and Emotional Learning folks, and I'm going to have them on in May to talk about what the curriculum is for social and emotional learning, because I think we've got to find the advocacy places to bring in these kinds of awareness that you're talking about, like spiritual awareness or soulful awareness or intuition or other forms of cognitive processing, to make room for all of these other ways that children show up that our current system doesn't have a curriculum for. They don't even know how to nurture it, In some ways, they're even trying to box it out. So then anything doesn't fit in the normative box, we don't have any way to see, and we want them to get in that box because that makes it easier in some ways for us to. So I think the advocacy around what you're talking about is really important. How do we advocate for a more of a social, emotional, soulful, spiritual curriculum? And the fear of getting into, spiritual or religious ideologies is one of the things that we haven't been able to nuance very well. Like when we're talking about a religious, are we talking about, an ideology of the religion? Or are we talking about the spiritual religious life of children? And what, how do we nurture that as well?
There is one last aspect of this that I want to get in, which is we covered the physical appearance, physical presence, and a little bit about the life presence or vitality of the child. But the last thing you want to be able to observe is the interest, which is present. We can observe how a child expresses their interest in the child. And I am putting the link to my slide presentation in the chat. Maybe people can copy this so you can go back to this, because and so I'm going to go and talk about how you observe the interest the child is showing in the world, and how you can articulate that, so that the last thing we need to address here. Let me go. Okay, where's that now?
John, while you're doing that, can you also share, you said there are the three things that you're looking at: physicality,
vitality, the movement, vitality, physicality, vitality, and interest.
Okay.
You can also look at intention, but that comes with an older people. So it's really four things, but. Okay, are we back to that? Yeah. So I'm going to go back to this form, and I'm going to go to the interest. So of course, trying to observe the interest that the child shows in the world starts with whatever activities they like to do. And of course, this teacher who filled this out was giving me that the child, you know, was in the building, knocking things down, gross motor play, you know, gave me the list of ways, playing doctor, less caretaking and more surgical. And so, you know, carrying sticks or a weapon of some sort. And so here's another child finding special things on the ground, making small things with clay, being an animal. In the picture, we saw the two children, one building blocks and making the tower, whereas the other child was making the colorful blocks and creating more balanced structures. We want to look at how the child expresses their interest in the world. And one question is what's the nature of their social engagement when they're involved in these things? And so, like in our particular case, we can call the social engagement was proximal but independent, with acknowledgement of peers' presence. Children can be extroverted and combative. So you look at the character of the social, look at the activities that children like to engage in. You look at the character of the social engagement. And again, these are ways of picking up on the child's energetic being. Moods. And so this particular teacher says this child's mood has been hard to read. He may appear calm and agreeable, but respond with a defiant, angry, or defensive mood. But he may also be cooperative and gentle. The child that's in our video, one teacher said it was anticipating, the mood was anticipating, joyous, focused, undistracted, satisfied. Here's a child who is mostly happy but needy. And here is one important thing to look at. Look at how there's impact on social engagement and our moods over an activity that a child is participating in. For instance, in our video, we had this child who was building this tower, but what was the impact of her building a tower? That it actually invited the engagement and interest of others. Where some people, the impact of their activities is always to exclude, to gain more social distance, and they protect what they're building from others and don't involve. So the impact on social engagement and our moods that the activities the child likes bring about is a very important way to look at the individuality of the child. Like in this case, you know, sometimes the child's engaged in an activity may lead to bounciness, fiery, sensitivity. In this particular case, the activity attracted the interest of peers, and that interest heightened the child's joy. So I think that gives an overall picture. And so I'll just come back to the screen and we can just kind of wrap up and talk about things overall. And I want to say that where we want to go from this, in some way, it'll be good if you can do an observation, take that form and do an observation, because what's important after you've done this observation is really cultivating, in a sense, what you think you already have a little bit of, Tanya, this feeling perception. In response to this, you can get a feeling perception. And out of this feeling perception, you can get these informative images. And these informative images can be used to then bring you to some knowledge of the individuality of what's been expressed in the child. And that's what we want to work on the next time we have a session. Any follow-up or any questions or anything?
So some homework you're giving Japa is for them to go on, and I've pasted on the Facebook chat as well the resource, your slide presentation, and they can get to that form.
They can get to that form in that slide presentation, and that will go through this this detailed way, you can try to observe the presence of the child in its three aspects: physical, the vitality of the child, and the interest of the child in the world, as a way of getting to the energetic presence of the child. And then being able to take that energetic presence as a feeling perception and develop. Imagery is important because it holds knowledge in a different way than we hold it otherwise. And so moving out of that feeling perception to an imagery element can be significant in terms of what you really can come to understand about what's going on.
Thanks, Japa. Are there any questions from anybody that's on the Zoom follow-up, or what's been one of the checkout questions that we often do is what's been interesting to you, like what's kind of been spurred in your thinking and your imagination as Japa's been sharing. Is there anything you want to echo or bring into the conversation that's showing up in you?
Well, to Japa's point is, it would be interesting to practice taking the energetic and narrowing it down to physical expression, right? Going the opposite direction. So I think I would find that difficult, like taking that form and going from the top down and being able to, I don't know. So it would be interesting for me to fill out that form and not go the opposite direction.
Yeah, I know. I definitely have. I always pick up on that level first too, so I understand where you're coming from.
And I think it'll be really interesting to write it down. I could go through and probably list out qualities in my boys of these things, but just like their breathy, or their voice, breathy, dry, wet, thinking about how it changes depending on what they're talking about. I think really writing that down would reveal things to me that I'm not necessarily seeing. So I think that'll be helpful.
Yeah, that's one thing in that little initial statement I make, I say the goal is to practice loving and careful observation and articulation, because that's one of the things that's important as well. As someone who's in a professional role, it's definitely important. It's not so necessarily important if you're a parent, because just doing that can heighten your relationship with your child. But, I'm someone who works with other teachers, and I have to work with how they can actually bring this to something that they can articulate and have as a source of continued engagement, and so that's practice. And it's like you, Tanya. I mean, I'm what they call a Saturn personality, the opposite of what's called a Moon personality. Moon personalities are people who are into details and things like that. And Saturn's the opposite, big picture people. But I have made it one of my life practices is to move from the Moon, move from Saturn to Moon. To be able to do that, to be able to provide more service in the world by virtue of being able to do that. Because as a Saturn personality, it's like, it becomes pretty useless sometimes.
Well, but it's
not useless for me and for whoever I'm relating to in the moment. I do a lot of listening in groups, that all that stuff is helpful, but I find I can definitely impact things in a different way if I do that struggle of bringing things into that Moon realm. And it's not easy.
No, not easy.
There's a couple of other resources. The James Hillman's The Soul's Code kind of comes out of this paradigm as well. And also we'll get into, I think, later in other weeks, how do we bring forth these images in a way that then can be guiding for us? So what are the expressive therapies or the expressive technologies? Once we have these intuitions, what are the creative means we can bring them forward like color or movement or music, or, there are all these kind of different ways in which we can express this deeper soul's code. And James Hillman's book, The Soul's Code, is really on this paradigm that our job is to see everybody's unique soul code, and not try to whittle it away into their functionality. Functionality is important, but how do we create spaces where the unique character and soul of every person can be honored and seen and beheld and nurtured? That really is the vision of the soul-centric city, and I would recommend The Soul's Code by James Hillman, which is actually pushing against a lot of the medical, even the psychological world that is bought into functionality as the primary goal of school or even mental health, is to get you to function in a societal context better. And James Hillman says, no, a lot of times, functionality is only part of the game. That wholeness and the fullness expression of our lives is really the goal. And functionality is a part of that, but it's not the goal. Are there any kind of closing thoughts, Japa? Anything you would want to add at closing, or anybody else on Zoom would want to add to the conversation?
I guess I'll just reiterate what I started off with in terms of my initial statements about these two elements. This loving, what does it mean to be loving? What does it mean to be careful? And for me, what it means to be loving is recognizing that that when we look at the presence of a child, that we're seeing this activity of spirit in its effort to create this person prepared to fulfill a destiny. And if we're not bringing that to the observation, then you can't. Then it doesn't embrace the being that's before us. It's not loving. And then again, if we're in a way, to Tanya's point a little bit, if we're doing observations, and if those observations are anyway gonna lift us to an energetic understanding of the child, we have to strive to make sure they're just not placing the child in a particular demographic, but that we'll did the work to nuance these a little bit. Because without that nuance, the individuality of the child is not going to be revealed. So there's a little bit of work that needs to be done in these observations to say something that is not just the child has black hair, or the child has brown skin or blue eyes, You have to look into that nuanced picture presence that's coming at you, if it's going to be at all valuable to move to the next point, because otherwise you will be stuck in just, this is a black child, this is a girl, this is a boy, and you won't go anywhere. You won't be able to develop any imagery.
Japa, can you give us a brief the next 2 weeks what we'll be doing?
Yeah, so next week we're going to be cultivating filling perception. There's a particular process by which you can, once you've done this, sometimes it'll rise for you right away. You do the observation and it floats, the imagery floats up. But if it doesn't float up, there are ways you can cultivate the filling perception. And there's using meditation and using art as ways of cultivating the filling perception, out of which the imagery can then emerge. And so we'll work with that and imagery next week. So how do we cultivate the filling perception, get to the imagery? And then in the third week, how do we look at that imagery for how it informs us about the wholeness of the child? What analytic tools can help with that? And most of these analytic tools that we'll be using will be what can make sense. I have Steiner's image of the human being, and it can get pretty esoteric, but I brought some that I think are very much relatable, some analytic tools. When you get to the analytic tool part, in some ways your own it's a dangerous place to go, because you can get so reductionist so quick. Analytic tools get reductionist. So you have to have analytic tools that can keep the whole thing whole, that can see the whole child and not do that. And so I will talk about some analytic tools that lend themselves to that wholeness and not reduce the child and reduce whatever you come up with.
Beautiful. Japa, thank you so much for giving your time and your wisdom to our city and to cultivating a soul-centric city and individuals. I appreciate your wisdom and your time. For those that have been joining us on Facebook, thanks for joining. We'll continue this the next 2 Thursdays at noon, and you can also find the download on Interfaith Paths to Peace webpage. Thank you all for joining. And